Welcome to SoTL006 Sessions, where we bring you the best and the latest in scholarship of teaching and learning from the voices of the researchers themselves. And now, let's join the host of SoTL006 Sessions, Anna Ropp.
Hello, this is Anna, and I'm here with Amy Moores from Chapman University. Welcome, Amy.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Do you mind just talking a little bit about yourself for the listeners in case they don't know you?
Sure thing. I'm an assistant professor at Chapman University, which is in Southern California. It's primarily an undergrad-facing institution for psychology, at least. So I work with undergrads. Our class sizes are capped around 25 students, which is really an ideal setting to have a mentor and teacher approach. I'm also a research fellow at the Kinsey Institute at Indiana University.
Oh, that's great. That's lovely. And now I'm jealous of 25 student cap.
I do have a dream. I really do have a dream job.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. So what listeners may not know is that I wanted to talk to Amy about an article she just published in Psychology of Women Quarterly about research methods in psychology, an exercise, a feminist exercise to help students understand some concepts. Amy, can you tell us a little bit about that? I was really excited to see it, and it sounds like a fun exercise.
Sure thing. So when I teach psychology classes, like all of us, we typically will teach a core course, and then if we have the opportunity, we'll get to teach a class that is related to our core research interests. So I really enjoy teaching research methods. At the same time, I find some of the research methods textbooks, the examples for how to illustrate our everyday lives, I don't mean to sound rude, but maybe they just fall a little flat. I find some examples about, stress and procrastination to just be not where I want things to go per se. I really try hard as an educator to map on psychology concepts to everyday life. And then my training when I was at the University of Michigan, I earned a dual degree in personality psychology and social contexts, as well as women's studies. So these two disciplines are just core to the way that I think, teach, and even draw out my research plans. So naturally, when I'm teaching about research methods, I want to talk about how science actually isn't quite objective as we think that it is. And I want to talk about what is good science. So how do we measure it? What are some methods? But then also I really like to talk about how as humans and as scientists that we come with our own biases. We live in a world and we operate in a world that is riddled with racism and sexism and inequities. And that can also filter down into the ways in which we design our science or how we evaluate other people's science. So one illustrative example for how I do this for research methods is, and this came to me, I'm a Saturday Night Live enthusiast. I watch it pretty religiously. So this came to me many years ago when Saturday Night Live featured a clip by the Lonely Islands called The Creep. And it's a video clip where Andy Samberg and his two colleagues, and Nicki Minaj is a part of this too, they have a dance and it's all about the creep. And they're spying on people. It's made to be humorous. They're stalking people. They're doing very creepy things. And I thought, oh, this is really interesting. I could probably teach inter-rater reliability through an observation study where students could code this. And it all kind of happened from there.
That's awesome. I love that. And I like the, Nicki Minaj is in it. So, it might be more entertaining for certain students. So,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. They definitely thought I was cool professor that day. I'm not sure about subsequent days, but definitely that day.
You got some cool points for that one. That's good.
Oh, unequivocally. And so, and again, the video is meant to be humorous. They're all dressed up as like this stereotypic geek person with like pants that are flooding and glasses, and they're doing these things. And when I first did this exercise, when I was teaching research methods, I had just watched the episode right before. So I came into class and I was just thinking the past few days about what it would look like. And you don't have to deliver this as dramatically as I did. I've done less dramatic reveals before. But I walked in the class and I just had everyone put everything away and just take out a piece of paper and a pencil. And a little bit of background is this was towards the beginning of the semester. So my students, I had already taught them kind of some of the core concepts when you're going through the textbook of operational definition, some basics of research design. And so it was pretty early in the semester. And then I told students, once they just had a piece of paper and a pencil on their desk, that I'm going to show them a video. And I want them to put a check mark on the piece of paper anytime they see something creepy happen on the video. And that's it. Those are the only instructions I gave them. Because I knew after watching the video, we could talk about what was their operational definition, and then understand too, and teach them what was inter-rater reliability. So the video goes on. It's pretty short. At this point, I recently looked it up. It has over 100 million views on YouTube. So it's a really popular video. And then there's different actions where, the Lonely Island crew, as well as Nicki Minaj, are doing different things like following people outside of an ATM or peeking in someone's window. Nicki Minaj at one point, she's going through a men's locker room, and she's even in a funeral home at one point, getting next to someone in a coffin, pretending to try to kiss them. So you can understand all of these things are meant to be humorous, yet are, illustrate the song, creepy. And so I had students watch this. Of course, everyone's laughing. They're like, what's going on? This is a funny video. And then I turn off the video and I was like, okay, so how many instances of creepy behaviors did you find? And I have students raise their hand, and one student is like, nothing was creepy. That was just a funny video. Another student was like, no, there was this one thing I found really creepy. And I was like, okay, hold your thought. I don't want to know what exactly it was. I just want to know the numbers right now. So I had everyone in the class tell me how many instances of creepy behavior that they coded, and I wrote it on the board. And the average was about one or two of how many things that they saw. So then I could talk about inter-rater reliability, because there I had, a group of 20 students who all had, similar coding behaviors. So then I could talk about what was inter-rater reliability. I could also bring it back to observational design, which they learned earlier. But then importantly, I got to talk about operational definitions. And at this point, they already had an idea of what they were, but now we got to really pick it apart. What were people viewing as creepy and what weren't they? And what was interesting was, by and large, in this first pass of watching the video, when people were deeming what behaviors were creepy, most were saying the behaviors of Nicki Minaj, of the woman in this video, of trying to kiss a man in a coffin, yet they weren't saying that the behaviors of the three men, stalking someone outside of their bedroom window and climbing up a tree, or, harassing them on the dance floor, they weren't saying that that was creepy. It was just when, a woman violated these norms. And then
that says a lot right there, I think.
Right. About what is normal behavior towards women. And so that was a really great segue, where then I could talk to the class about, and I did this in a non-confrontational way, as a way that we do when we're educators and we're trying to talk about a really complicated subject and our students don't really see it coming. Or I'm like, wow, that's really interesting. So what's normal behavior around women? And then that led me in. I prepared a really brief PowerPoint slide about sexual harassment and then gender harassment, because I think when the everyday person often thinks of sexual harassment, we're thinking of quid pro quo, and we're thinking of, I'm going to, in order to get hired, I must have sex, or some sort of negotiation like that. Yet sexual harassment covers a lot of different behaviors, stalking or even infantilizing and gender harassment. So then I got to talk about that a little bit more, and about, I was also able to weave in some research about how humor tends to disguise sexism. Like, we find it more palatable, and it can also be really insidious. So that makes it kind of this quote normal unquote behavior towards women that, it's tolerated, if not celebrated, often to do these things, and that women just have to kind of, brush it off like, oh yeah, he really likes me, that's why he's following me, or, and constantly asking me out, even though I don't want that type of behavior. So then we got to unpack that a little bit more, which was, really interesting and enlightening. And then I said, okay, so I want us to consider that, scientists, we have a bias, and that could very well be a sexist bias about, how we're thinking about behaviors. So based on what we've talked about related to sexual harassment and gender harassment, and what we're thinking is deemed culturally normal behavior towards women, where we might not be putting that same behavior, we might not be holding men to that same standard, I want you to think of a new operational definition for creepy behaviors. And we're going to rewatch this video. And now I want you to really critically examine all of these behaviors. What's going on? What are people doing? What's being said? Look at the nonverbals, in addition to what's being said and the actions. And now I want you to recode all of the creepy behaviors. And so we watch the video again. And then this time there was less laughing. There's habituation. They already saw it. And then this time they're seeing it, or they're really earnestly attempting to see this video in a different light, and carefully thinking about, although the lyrics are funny and innocent, they're not intended to be harmful. Where do they see instances of, things that have been taken too far, that aren't quite jokes, that are, creepy behaviors, or could fall under the rubric of harassment? So then after that, I asked everyone, well, this time, how many creepy behaviors did you all code? And this time the average was, people were saying 6, 7, 8. And so the average was substantially higher.
That's amazing.
I know, right? It was and this, I mean, everyone who's listening, I did this on the fly because I watched Saturday Night Live the weekend before.
I love that. That's great.
Yeah, I didn't anticipate it to be so profound. And then, really illustrate too, again, hitting home these core concepts of research methods, inter-rater reliability. We got to have now a much higher level conversation about operational definition, and thinking about how researchers, we can have biases when we're coming up with our own operational definitions or coming up with our own research questions. So I found that to be really helpful too, where now people are seeing creepy behaviors. If you unmask that or uncouple it from humor, they're seeing it a bit differently, and really can hone in on creepy behaviors. And whether they think that the behavior was harmless or meant to be a joke, that's kind of separate, that's another operational definition. So yeah, the sheer average number is much higher the second time around. And then we got to have some great conversations around biases, around gender harassment and stalking, and then the ways in which we can move forward and, for lack of better words, check our biases when we're creating research, and then also evaluating other people's research. So this was one of those times as an educator where you get to see that aha moment, and it was really beautiful. So I like this exercise a lot.
Yeah. And you've done it several times since then, correct?
Yeah, I've done it a couple more times. I haven't taught research methods in a bit. I have one of my best friends, Nicole Sorhagen. She's a professor also at an undergrad university, Millersville. She is the core instructor for research methods. So she's been doing this exercise for the past couple of years. Her students enjoy it as well. And one thing I should know is did this exercise quite frequently when I taught research methods, a bit before the Me Too movement became really large in the US and elsewhere. And so I think now students might be a little bit better at picking up some of these creepy behaviors. So I wouldn't be surprised if you were to do this with your students, that the average number isn't zero. Some time has passed. The cultural zeitgeist is now where people are understanding more of these behaviors. But I do anticipate there will still be a substantial difference between the first time that someone shows this after a discussion about talking about sexual harassment and researcher biases, and then the second time watching this.
And at the very least, it's going to explain operational definitions at a little deeper level and inter-rater reliability. One of the reasons I like this for a lot of reasons. I think partially because I teach research methods, but given my research background, given the other classes I teach, I bring in a lot of studies from my area. So I love the fact that, you can talk about gender and discrimination and all kinds of interesting things, and sort of have it in other classes other than just these specialized, classes. But yeah, I like that. And I think, the other reason I like it is because I think you could adapt it in a lot of ways. So I could see this doing really well online. I know a lot of people are going to be teaching online or hybrid, but I could see this going, a different experience, but I think that you could adapt it for an online class.
Oh, absolutely. And then this past spring when I was teaching online, as many of us were, I was using Zoom. And I know other platforms have, different functionality, but I think this would be great too, where you could put people or randomly assign people into breakout rooms on Zoom where they could come up with operational definitions or agree on them, where you can still have a group work component to this online as well.
Yeah. And I think, I'm doing asynchronous online in the fall. So,
Mm-hmm.
we won't have the breakout rooms, but I could still adapt this for that kind of class. So
Oh,
I like that.
absolutely.
Yeah. And as I was listening to you, I'm like, well, I should do this in Psych of Gender. I mean, maybe not so much about inter-rater reliability, but definitely, more about the sexual harassment piece and how it becomes normalized in our society.
Yeah. Oh, I'm happy you brought that up. I did do something similar when I taught Psych of Gender. This was around the time when the It Gets Better campaign was really popular with Dan Savage.
Yes.
And that campaign, for those of you who are listening who aren't aware, was really on the tail end of suicides that were happening among queer kids, particularly boys. There were at least 5 deaths in 1 month in 2009, and Dan Savage created this campaign where people were talking. So they were older people who were gay or celebrities and allies talking about how life gets better, to try to send a message of hope that things are really tough now and bullying might be relentless, but life gets better. And then when I was teaching Psych of Gender, I thought, that's so interesting. We don't have kind of a parallel campaign for the slut shaming that women endure. And this bullying and harassment just for occupying the world as woman-bodied growing up. And a lot of that harassment might be really similar. So I remember showing this video and then I got to unpack what is normal behavior towards women and, why is this skirted off as a joke? And then I didn't necessarily teach about inter-rater reliability or anything, but sort of like, how is this the gold standard of humor, like harassing women?
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah. And as a side note, I just want to say to the listeners, I'm queer and it does get better. And if you need somebody to talk to about queer kids or talk to queer kids, I am available. So there's some really interesting research for trans kids, especially if they've got supportive people in their life, and how it changes their psychological outcomes. So that's a total side note, but you put me right there. So
right. Yeah. No, important side note. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Amy, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you telling us about this activity. And I think I'm so glad that you took the time to write it up.
Of course. Thank you for having me. And
Yeah.
for those of you listening who do this, keep me informed. Feel free to email me or tweet me. I would love to hear how this, transpires in your classroom.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And there, just as a note, there's going to be a link to the article in the show notes. So absolutely. Thank you for joining us today.
Great. Thank you so much.